Linux is the #1 skill you must know as a DevOps engineer. Everything runs on Linux. Containers, Kubernetes, and even Azure itself, it's all Linux. And the best way to learn Linux is to build your own system. In this course series, I'm going to be teaching you how to build a fully functional Arch Linux desktop from scratch in a way that you will understand. And my course is different because I will explain all of the steps as I go along. I'm not just firing off the commands, I'm actually explaining my thought process to you. By the end of this course, you can safely call yourself a competent Linux administrator. And I'm a calm speaker, so feel free to watch this at double speed, but I do highly recommend to watch until the end. This is the first video in a 20 video course series which I'll be uploading on YouTube. So that being said, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this course where we are going to be learning about Linux. So I am actually on my freshly built Arch Linux system and I can create terminals by pressing Command Q, and it's all looking very fancy smancy. I have my web browser, I have my Obsidian, I have my OBS, and I can do everything I want with my window manager, and it's working super well. And this is what we are going to be building together. And this might be a bit of an unconventional approach to learning Linux, but this is the approach that has really drove some points home to me when I actually started doing this project for myself years ago. And I actually wish that I had listened when people recommended this project to me. Some people recommended it to me and I was a bit stubborn and I kept going into the theory and it didn't work that well. And now I just want to impress that on you as well, that this is actually an interesting way of learning Linux and going beyond the fundamentals of Linux. Because building an Arch Linux system is not for beginners, not the way that we are going to do it at least. So if you are completely fresh at Linux, I have a section here about preparation with a few resources that I recommend. So I'm going to be going through the mind map in clockwise fashion, and in the end I'm going to recommend the preparation that you could or should do for this before starting the course. Now, the goals for this course are like this series. It's not going to be a fast track to just install Arch Linux and that's it. Like that is not the goal. The goal is to learn Linux on a bit more deeper level than just the fundamentals. So when you watch these tutorials on YouTube, they are 20 minutes long and they just fire off the commands to install Arch Linux. And it works, but you don't really learn much from that, right? And the beauty from learning Arch Linux and installing Arch Linux from scratch is that you just start with a blinking cursor, you have nothing, and then you build it up to a system like you see here, all by yourself. And you can have full control of everything that is happening on your system, and you can know exactly what is going on, where you put things, and that is just a very satisfying experience. So it's not just going to be a do this and install. No, I'm going to take a bit more deeper dives along the way and explain what I know. The goal is to learn to understand what's going on. I'm going to be building a systemd-centric system. So I'm going to be explaining what that is, but if you already know what that is I'm using systemd completely. I don't use Network Manager. We're just going to use systemd, networkd, and resolved for the networking. So we don't even need a Network Manager. And just trying to do as much as we can with pure systemd. And also, I am going to have the stateless workstation in mind. So you want to, I'm now moving towards a more dev container-centered workflow where my configuration is located in containers and I have localized environments, containerized environments that I work in. And you want to have as little installed locally as possible, and all of the dependencies for your code and things like that you want to have installed in containers. So that's also a goal that we are working towards. So the end state of the course, the final goals are, of course, a fully encrypted system. We're going to do our best to make it secure with a balance of making it usable as well. We're going to have a window manager. So as you see here, I'm running a window manager, not a desktop environment. Of course, we're going to have a browser, a terminal, and with a basic setup for working and editing in the terminal with tmux. And we're going to configure an automatic lock screen. So that's the thing with Arch Linux. All of this stuff is not configured. You have to do it yourself. And you actually have to take charge of your own security, which is why it's such a good learning experience too. Now, some recommendations for what to actually run it on. I recommend using a physical machine. You can do it in a virtual machine, but there's just something about doing it on a physical machine that you dedicate to learning Linux, because that's what you're embarking on when you watch this, when you begin this course. You're embarking on a journey to learn Linux, and I think it's a good way. I think it's a good approach to do that on a separate machine that you can hold in your hands physically and not virtual machines. This is because it creates a mental separation of learning and tinkering. So you probably have a stable workstation already, like maybe running Mac OS on a MacBook, or you're running Windows on a machine. Keep running that. Don't change that. So one of the mistakes that I made early on was that I went to daily driving Linux too fast, and I just went into it. And in some ways, it was a good learning experience because I was forcing myself to do it, but I wasn't completely ready. I felt rather overwhelmed, and things would break, and I couldn't do my tasks for work. So I had to actually take unplanned days off to fix my system and then catch up with those hours later. I don't recommend that. It's better to have a separate system, a laptop or something like that you dedicate to learning Linux and that you use as a tinkering environment. So what I do, I have my office here, and here I do my creation and my normal work, but I have a ThinkPad, a laptop in the living room. And in the evenings when I'm just chilling and relaxing, I have that ThinkPad on my lap, and then I'm just like installing packages and I'm just messing around with things. And usually it's just rotation of Linux distros that I'm testing out and just playing around. And this creates a separation in your mind of like separating the work and play. And that way you're also going to be seeing learning as play. So tinkering and messing around with Linux is going to become a playful activity to you, because you're not depending on that laptop. You're not depending on that to do your work. So you're free to just break stuff and destroy it and have to rebuild it. It's like, okay, I broke it. I learned from it. Let's not do that again. And then you reinstall it again. And that is a very nice, good way of approaching it, I think. Instead of just going really serious and, oh, I have to learn Linux, take a more of an open approach to it and see it as a playful activity. So don't go daily driving too early is what I would recommend. Hey there, hope you like the content so far. Just wanted to mention that the full course is already available in my school community. If you join the community, you become member of a group of very active individuals who are all helping each other. You get access to all of my courses, and you get access to the live Q&A calls and the forum where you can ask me questions directly and get help with your Arch Linux install or anything that you need help with. I think you might like it. Check it out. And there is an element of satisfaction on doing it on a physical machine that you can open up and hold in your hand, and actually seeing that desktop environment appear for the first time instead of doing a virtual machine. So I recommend using a virtual machine. I recommend using a physical machine, not a virtual machine. Secondly, I recommend using a laptop. There are a few reasons for this. So with Arch Linux, if you just start it, it will just keep running. There's no security in place. There's no lock screen. Power management is not handled. Power management is not configured. So you have to learn these things yourself. You have to configure all of this yourself. And that is a learning curve, but it's also a very good way of driving home the fact that everything in Linux can be adjusted and configured. And any problem can be solved by simply editing text files, by simply managing to get the right configuration and to solve your problems. And this all contributes to a certain mindset that I want to cultivate in you when you learn Linux. It's not just about Linux, it's about a mindset that you have towards your computing, towards your operating system, which is centered around tinkering, figuring out problems, and knowing that, getting confidence in yourself that when you have a certain goal on your system, you can reach it by scripting, by configuring, and by putting some effort into it. So the laptop I recommend is the ThinkPad T480. That's a really nice, good machine. And these are usually just, what you call it, they are enterprise grade laptops. So they are used for like business people. They are not made anymore. But what you do is you get a refurbished one. So here in the Netherlands, you can buy refurbished ThinkPads. And well, maybe I can just refurbished ThinkPad T480. If I Google for that, then let me see. There are a few companies here in the Netherlands that do it. But here, for example, there is one here. Let me see what the prices are for that if you get a refurbished one. Okay, so here we have a few prices. So here is a T480 with an i7 processor and 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is 379 euros. Here is another one with an i3 that's 255 euros. I got one with 32 gigabytes of RAM, an i7, and 1 terabyte of hard disk for 700 euros. And it's a really, really good machine. It's an excellent machine for coding, for just doing browsing, and it's going to last me for at least 5 to 8 more years. So buy a refurbished one or a used one, and it's a really, really good experience to be working on a ThinkPad T480 running Arch Linux. So that's the one I really recommend. But in reality, any old laptop will do. If you have 4 gigabytes of RAM, you have enough. You can just run, even if you have 2 gigabytes of RAM, it will be enough. Any old laptop will do. Because it's just so extremely minimal, Arch Linux, and it's going to be a good experience no matter which one you do. But that's why I recommend laptops, because you have to configure things like lock screens and battery and things like that. I built it on a desktop here, but I also have one on a laptop, as I said, in the living room. Now, the next section I want to speak about is why. So why should we learn Linux and why Arch Linux? So why learn Linux? Well, I'm actually going to speak about that in the context of why you should learn Linux as a cloud/DevOps engineer. And if you are in the United States, then very often you already know Linux if you are a DevOps engineer, because in the States, usually they see DevOps as a next level of a system administrator. So you are system administrator for 5 years or something, and then you graduate towards DevOps because you have an interest in coding. That is often what I hear. However, here in Europe, it's a little bit different. Here, DevOps is actually sometimes an entry-level position, and you can be a DevOps engineer without knowing Linux on a very deep level. However, I don't recommend that, and I don't think you are really a DevOps engineer if you don't know Linux, and I'm going to be explaining you why. So you are very likely to be encountering virtual machines running in the cloud that run Linux. So there are full Azure environments that only run Windows Server, for example, but almost any environment has Linux in some shape or form running. And that's why it's very likely that you're going to be encountering it, even if you don't know it yet. So if you want to become a cloud engineer, a DevOps engineer, knowing Linux is just essential. It's a fundamental because everything runs on Linux. Azure runs on Linux. Everything in Azure is Linux. And like, I think it's like how many percentages of devices running Linux. Let me see, Linux statistics. Here we go. There is Linux powers 40% of websites whose operating system is known. Linux powers 85% of smartphones. Let me see. 96% of the top 1 million web servers are running Linux. So Linux is everywhere. Linux is everywhere, and it's good. It's a great move in your career to learn it, because that means that you can be very employable and your skills are applicable in many places. Besides from that, if you are DevOps cloud engineer, you are going to be working with containers and Kubernetes, and all of that is Linux. If you don't know Linux, you're going to be having a hard time working with Docker containers, with fixing permission issues, installing packages. All these things you need to know if you want to work with containers on a beyond basic level way. So you will need to know it. You need to know the elements of a Linux operating system, how the file system works, how permissions work, and especially if you're going to be going into Kubernetes, and if you're going to go beyond managed Kubernetes, you will need to know Linux. So it's a very important tool in your skill set. And besides professionally, it's also a very nice home lab and hobby kind of interest, because you can breathe life into old machines. Everybody has a couple of old laptops lying around in their house, and by running Linux, you can just make a fully functional machine out of that. It works really well. It can make very old hardware very functional, and it's free. Like Linux is open source, and you can play around with so many free open source alternatives in your home lab, which is a very fun hobby to do. The self-hosting hobby, I really enjoy it a lot. And while you technically could do that without knowing too much Linux, it's actually a great way to have a hobby that also strengthens your professional career. Because if your hobby is related to what you do in your day job, then your career growth is just going to skyrocket. That's what happened with me. You need to know Linux because, and by doing this course, you are going to get an understanding of the following. You will understand more about the boot process. So when you start a computer, what actually happens? What goes into turning on a power button and actually seeing this on your screen, right? Have you ever really considered that? And building your own system from scratch really drives this point home to you that all of it is a process that starts somewhere and then it calls different processes, and it's a fascinating thing, really, if you really start to think about it. And by doing this course, by doing this project, you will get a better understanding of what actually goes on when you press that power button. So it's important to know that, I think, because it will help you in debugging. If you have a Kubernetes cluster that doesn't work, then you know where to begin. Like let's start at the fundamentals. Let's start in on the node. Is everything all right on the node, right? Is everything running properly? Are there any failed services, etc.? So it's important to know about the boot process. It's important to know about file systems, about permissions. You need to know how to interact with systemd, because all main distros now run on systemd. You need to know how to work with package managers, how to update packages, how to remove them, how to install them. You need to know how to troubleshoot, right? Finding the logs, reading the logs, debugging. All these kinds of skills are super important in your career as a DevOps engineer. And all of these are learned by learning Linux. And finally, there is bash scripting. So it's a very important skill to know bash scripting if you want to be a DevOps engineer, because many CI/CD pipelines are just a series of scripts in some shape or form. And you will do very well in learning bash and knowing that. So that is just a bit of a rant on why you should learn Linux. And if you don't know this, then I think, like, if you don't know bash scripting, you're going to have a very hard time configuring Azure DevOps pipelines, for example. You're going to have a hard time containerizing applications or debugging them and helping the developers. So take it from me, you need to know Linux as a cloud engineer. Now, why Arch Linux? Let's talk a bit about that. So there's so many thousands of distros. Why Arch of all of them? Now, there are a few other minimal ones like Gen 2 or even Linux from scratch. That's when you compile all of the packages yourself. But Arch is a very nice balance between that, between having to compile everything yourself and having a, like, it just works out of the box experience. Arch Linux is extremely minimal. It is just the kernel and a few packages that you need to actually get something running on your screen, but that's it. When you install Arch Linux, all you basically have is a blinking cursor and a root user, and that's it. You need to install everything yourself. And by doing this process of doing a very minimal distro like this, you constantly run into, oh, I don't have this package. Oh, I need to configure this. Oh, I need to still do that. And you constantly run into these little challenges. And this is firstly just going to teach you about all of the internal dynamics of an Arch Linux operating system or Linux operating system. It's going to show you what's actually necessary, what is usually done out of the box for you when you do an Ubuntu install, for example. Encryption, you need to figure that out yourself, right? You need to do that. And in the course, I'm going to show you everything about it. And it helps to cultivate this mindset of curiosity, of what is actually running on my system, what is actually going on. So if I do PS3 here I see absolutely everything that's running on my system, and everything is there because I put it there. And I know exactly what each of these processes do. And in the course, I'm constantly going through this overview and explaining what's going on, what do we have installed, what is actually running here. And this is I really encourage to get that kind of attitude towards your operating system, because you start to really understand what's going on, and therefore you also know it will be much easier for you to debug things when things are not working. And all of this contributes to a mindset of a good, well-rounded engineer who is able to identify problems, to debug, to check out the logs, and to figure things out, and to tinker, and to know where to look, and to solve problems. It's basically a huge series of problem solving and puzzling that you're embarking on with this. And it's not just about installing the Arch Linux. It's about cultivating this mindset and this attitude and this ability to solve things and to give yourself confidence that you can do it. So it's this do-it-yourself approach, basically, that knowing that you can run your own operating system securely and being the system administrator of your own operating system. Another reason is that the Arch Wiki is one of the best resources on Linux on the internet, in my opinion. There is just so much available on the Arch Wiki. It has a full installation guide, which we are going to be following, but it shows you everything you need to know about installing your system. But if you have, if I'm looking for like DaVinci Resolve, for example, if I search for that, DaVinci Resolve, and if I open that, for example, then it will just have a complete wiki page on that software, and it will tell you which drivers it works with and all of the problems that usually occur when installing it, etc. So it is just an amazing resource. If you look for calendar, I don't know, just here, calendar, list of applications, other. So here they have all of these open source calendar alternatives for you that you can test out. And it's just such an amazing resource for open source software and running your system. They have a full security guide as well, security, which we are going to be also touching upon in this course, security. So you have everything you need to run your system professionally, all in this same wiki. So even if I'm on different Linux systems, I always go to the Arch Wiki if I need to solve a problem. I always go there first. So that is also a really good reason to at least install Arch once, because you get familiar with the Arch Wiki, and you can add it to your bucket of resources that you use for debugging and for learning. So, well, I've already spoken about it leads to a deeper understanding of all the moving parts and a curious mindset. It drives home that everything needs to be configured and that everything in Linux is a file. And I mean, you don't need Arch Linux to understand that, but for me, it really drives that home, that everything can be configured, everything should be configured, and that everything in Linux is a file. It is actually even the processes that you run, all of everything you do in Linux is a file, even the proc file system. So if you go to the proc, here we see all of the running processes that are running on my system. And if I go into this proc directory, and if I cat the C group file, then I get information about the C group that this is running in, for example. If I do cat syscall, everything is a file. Everything, cat mount info, will that one work? Here, even everything you do on Linux is a file. Even the running processes are represented as files. So that is such an interesting take to running a computer, to running an operating system. If you come from Windows, for example, this was really mind-blowing to me, that almost everything I could interact with as a file on Linux, and almost everything can be configured. So I think Arch in particular really helps to drive that home. And finally, there is just the satisfaction of starting with nothing, a minimal operating system, a blinking cursor, and then you start your system and you type hyperland, which is the window manager I'm using, you press enter and then boom, it starts, and then you have a graphical environment. It's just a really satisfying experience, I promise you. Now, lastly, like I said, Arch Linux is not for complete beginners. I would not recommend this if you have never touched Ubuntu. If this is your first exposure to Linux, then I don't recommend starting this course just yet. I will in order to prepare for this course, I would say install at least 2 different distros using USBs. So I hope I've convinced you to use a physical device and then just take your laptop and install Ubuntu on it, for example, and install it, use it for a little bit, check out what software is on there, go through the install process, and maybe surf the web for a bit and just get a feel for what that one is like. And then maybe you can try Fedora, for example, or OpenSUSE. I don't know. Just try a couple of different distros, Pop OS, and get familiar with the process of flashing a USB stick, entering your laptop's BIOS, and then selecting the boot order, and then installing Linux. Like, do that a couple of times so at least you get that in the fingers, that process, and get a feel for it. And then I recommend testing out GNOME and KDE as desktop environments, for example, because this will help you to understand what the difference is between a desktop environment and a window manager. And as a bare minimum, I would say watch this course. It will be linked down below by Free Code Camp. It's a great course that will go through all of the fundamental parts of a Linux operating system. It will show you how to install the examples that I just mentioned. It talks about the file system. It talks about proc, how to debug things. It's a 6-hour course, and if you're completely fresh at Linux, I would say watch this one first to get an initial understanding of what's going on. So my first idea was to do this myself, to make fundamentals of Linux, but I mean, there's already so much good material on there available about it. I figured I would just do my own sort of special take on a first proper Arch Linux for a first Linux project by installing Arch Linux, and it's really great material. Next, there is the book called The Linux Command Line, and this is available for free on the internet. So this is I'll put the links down below, but The Linux Command Line is a book that you can by William Schatz that you can purchase, but it's also available for free on the Internet Archive. And it's like a 600-page book, which will teach you all of the basics of like running commands and editing files, manipulating files and directories. Like, this is such a great resource to just go through. And you will have a much better experience if you just go through this, and you'll be much more able to follow what I'm doing in the series, because I do think it's important to at least know basic file navigation before starting this series. So you don't need to do the entire book, but maybe say the first 100 pages or so. Here it goes deep into permissions. This is all extremely good information to know. It's all for free, and I highly recommend going through this book at least, let's say, well, I would say go through the entire book, but at least halfway through, that definitely seems like a good approach. And then finally, another great resource to learn Linux is the LPIC 1 certification. So I have this certification, and you don't need to get the certification, but it's a nice goal to work towards. This is the world's largest and most recognized Linux certification. It's a Linux system administration certification. It will teach you everything you need to know about managing a Linux operating system. But even if you don't want to go for the certification, the good thing about it is that all of the learning materials are available for free. So here is there's a PDF version, but here, like, the system architecture, booting the system, changing run levels, designing a hard disk layout, boot manager, shared libraries, package management. It's all here. Everything you need to know about Linux is here. And I'm not necessarily saying you need to go through all of this before you can start my course. I'm saying that you should know the fundamentals of Linux, know about navigating the file system, working on the command line, and then after you've done this fundamentals course and doing some tutorials from these books and this one, you can just try the course and see how far you get. And if it gets a bit too detailed, then you can return to that topic in one of these resources, because you can just look up, okay, so I need to know a little bit more about essential system services, for example, system logging. Well, I can go to this lesson and I can learn everything about the system logging, for example. So I really wanted to point you to these resources, because basically this is an entire course on how to learn Linux. And if you know these fundamentals and then some of this, and then take a look at this one as well, and then start on this project, you are in very good shape to actually learn Linux well, properly, in a fun, practical way that is not too theoretical. Because that's the thing that I did wrong in the beginning. I was way too much in the theory. I should have started with building something much earlier, and that's something that I want to impress upon you. So this was a very long introduction, but I think it's a good thing to actually prepare you for what's coming, what we're going to try to achieve in the course, and how you can prepare for it, and how to learn Linux in general, basically. So I think I should title this video How to Learn Linux and which resources you need. But now that we have the introduction out of the way, let's get into the first module of installing Arch Linux. All the best of luck and see you there.